they'll make a decision to get up and move forward. That's the goal. Get up and move forward.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a very special guest today from the Situation Report with Chad Robichaud, our friend Jeremy Stalnecker. How's it going?
Good, man. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California. It's near where I live right now, actually. So for those that are familiar with this area, kind of an hour north of San Diego, an hour south of Los Angeles, right in the middle, in a very small community called Hemet, California. When I was a kid, the only thing that was there were like cows and alfalfa fields. It's changed a little bit over time, but that was my upbringing.
What's there now?
So this is a whole nother podcast episode, but the city about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, decided to put in low-income housing. And so now it consists primarily of gangs and bad neighborhoods. But none of that was there when I was a kid, which is it's really weird to go back there now because of how different it is. Yeah.
And you live somewhere nearby now?
I live in Murrieta, California.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Murrieta, Temecula. Yeah, so a lot of people know that area, but it's a beautiful area. And my kids are here, my parents are here, everyone's here, so it's fun.
Sweet. And what was it? I guess what was it like growing up there? It sounds like it's kind of it's California's like this. You can be somewhat in the middle of nowhere and be in a major city within an hour. You can be in the mountains or the desert or whatever, right?
Yeah, and again, Marines know this, right? But if you're like driving out to 29 Palms from Camp Pendleton, you'd go through the valley that I lived in. So it was deserty, but a lot of agriculture. I think when I moved there as a little kid, there were about 10,000 people in the valley that I lived in. And so, now it's well over 100,000. But man, we would play outside all day and there was no danger. My parents had no idea where I was most of the time. And it was a quiet upbringing, but it was a good upbringing. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And then you went to college after that somewhere, I imagine?
Yeah, I went to college, went to a small private college in Pensacola, Florida, and was commissioned, went through a commissioning program while I was there, and then was commissioned out of college. So I was doing my best to get as far away from home as possible, and Florida's about as far away as you can get from California.
Sure, yeah.
Went to school, had a good time. Best thing that came out of that, I married my wife, met my wife and married her. Yeah, good times.
So what made you decide, I guess you're answering the question to some degree, but what made you decide to join the Marine Corps? Was it the Hemingway, I want to go have my moment somewhere and get away from home and become a man or whatever? What was it? Because it was pre 9/11 when you joined.
Yeah, it was pre 9/11. I don't know. I've been asked this a lot, and I answered, I guess, different ways. But when I was a little kid, so I come from a very conservative Christian family, but my dad, as much as he loves America, all that was not in the military. Didn't come from a military family. But when I was very young, started reading books about Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, and kind of my whole world was reading books about the military. It's funny, my son, who's 14, asked me a couple weeks ago, did you watch a lot of videos about Navy SEALs? And I'm like, no, we didn't watch videos. I didn't have a phone, didn't have any way to watch videos, right? But read a lot of books, and it kind of just stirred those feelings of service in me, and had a few family friends who had been in the military. One very close family friend who had actually been part of the island hopping campaigns in the Pacific during World War II, and I'd sit and listen to him tell stories. So it was one of those things. I don't know that I ever made a decision. It was just always, that's what I'm going to do. And college kind of got in the way. I wanted to enlist. My parents said, you need to go to college first, and we're going to pay for it. So I went to college, and while I was there, figured out, you could go through a commissioning program and go to officer candidate school while you're in college, and go into the Marine Corps as an officer. So, yeah, it wasn't super thoughtful or deep. Just kind of took the steps forward and ended up there.
Sure. And you were in the invasion probably, right?
Yeah, so 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, that was my unit. We deployed to Kuwait in January of 2003. And then sat on the border, did all that stuff for a few months. And then, the first Marine infantry unit that went into Iraq was 1-5 was our battalion. Breached the berm, went in, secured the southern objective. First KIA of the war in Iraq, Lieutenant Shane Childers was one of our lieutenants. was killed that first morning of the war. And then made our way to Baghdad. The Battle of Baghdad on April 10th was also our battalion, and crazy, crazy fight. And we came home and got out. So yeah.
Why'd you decide to get out, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, there were a lot of reasons, right? So I was married. I had two little
Mm-hmm.
kids, and um, I love the Marine Corps, but I didn't love being away from them all the time. So that was one thing that figured into it. But probably the biggest thing going into the Marine Corps. So I went to officer candidate school in 1995. Um, my pay entry base date was in 96. I was commissioned in 99. So for those familiar, right, with that period of time, there was nothing happening in the world. And the only thing we knew about combat was Desert Storm, what happened in Somalia, some smaller things that happened, went fast. Panama, I remember Panama when I was a kid. Um, so I went through that kind of peacetime Marine Corps thing as an infantry officer, then had an opportunity to go to combat, and everyone at that time assumed this is a one and done.
Mm-hmm.
When President Bush said mission accomplished, truly, like it's over. And so I had done my thing and didn't want to go back to a peacetime Marine Corps. For those who are from the infantry community, you can have the best possible infantrymen. For me, those Marines are incredible, and they were incredible. It was an amazing time. Um, as long as they're in combat. But when they're back home, it's horrible.
Mm.
And you spend all your time chasing guys down and trying to get them out of trouble. So I didn't want to go back to that. And I really felt like the war is going to be over anyhow. And so I'm going to transition to something else. Obviously, I was wrong, but I think most of us were wrong then. But yeah, so there are a lot of factors, but that was the biggest one. I just didn't want to go back to that peacetime Marine Corps.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I got out in 2010, and that's why I got out, because
Yeah.
our next two rotations were going to be to train Iraqi and then Afghan police, and I'm like, fuck that, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have absolutely no desire to do that job. It's just asking for trouble. Like, to put a bunch of 82nd Airborne
Yeah.
guys around, and effectively in a garrison, but on the other side of the world,
Yeah.
that does not make any sense at all.
No, and people that come through that understand that, right? So I had done a deployment with my battalion to Okinawa, and we were supposed to, after 9/11, go to Afghanistan, our battalion. In fact, we were loading planes at March Air Reserve Base on Christmas Eve. And then it shut down. We didn't end up going, and they were going to send us back to Okinawa. So, hey, you're going to go to war, but now you're not. And the thought of that was like soul crushing because this war is going on and we're not going to be a part of it. And then we ended up not going to Okinawa, but going to Iraq. But the thought of coming back to that, I just couldn't. I can't even explain it to people that haven't been a part of that. But
Sure,
I just
yeah.
couldn't even get my brain around, like, how do I go back to caring about DUIs and NJPs?
Yeah, for
Who
real.
had who in the barracks room? Like, how do I go back to caring about that?
Well, I don't know how it works for the Marine Corps, but in the Army, after your platoon leader time, you go. Usually, you go be an XO somewhere. Or
Yep.
you work at like S3 at battalion or
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. Well, how's it go for you guys?
Yeah, same thing. So when I came back, if I had stayed in, I was going to go do a B billet. I probably would have ended up at the School of Infantry. I had orders to the School of Infantry.
SOI is not bad. I mean, there's worse places to be
Yeah,
than that.
it would have been the best possible scenario for me. But there's no guarantees. It's always needs in the Marine Corps, right? So you
Yeah.
can end up anywhere. And after that B billet, which is 2.5, 3 years long, then you go to a school. So it would have been another almost 5 years before I would have come back to the fleet, probably.
Oof.
So it's a long road, and I knew what I was good at that time. I was 25, 26 years old, and I realized, I'm not general officer material. I'm not that. Like, hey, be down with the guys and lead on the ground. And I really came to terms with that and looked down the road and thought, I can't go do schools. And it just wasn't me. And so
Yeah.
it made sense to get out.
Yeah, for sure. You don't want to be in you don't want to be in that job if you're not suited for it, right? But
Yeah, and some guys are great at it,
Mm.
by the way. I mean, they're incredible, right? Like, you meet these guys, and you're like, man, I would follow you anywhere.
Mhm.
And I hope that my Marines would have said the same about me. But I knew in my heart, like, I have a limit, a capacity, and caring about the big blue arrows and the the organization of European forces and all. I just didn't. It didn't connect with me at all.
yeah. Oddly enough, I guess, you did kind of come back to the States and do something that is more administrative. You were an assistant pastor for a while,
Yeah.
right? For some amount of time, for about a decade, I believe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I was, so I came back, and again, that's a longer story. But I didn't know what I was going to do after the Marine Corps. My family and I were attending a church in Oceanside, and the pastor there said, "Hey, we're doing this stuff. We've got buildings going up and all these things happening. Um, I don't have a Bible degree. I didn't go to seminary or
Mm.
anything like that. But he said, I know you're a leader, so why don't you come? You can do project leadership and project management stuff for us." And so that seemed like a good place to land in transition. And so yeah, I came back from Iraq. Um, Literally 30 days after getting back, I was working on that church staff, and turns out it wasn't a great place to land. That first year was terrible, but I ended up kind of working through that, and I was at that church for 5 years. I pastored a church for another 7 years. So I was involved in church ministry for a long time, which is a real weird turn. I mean, I came from that. My dad was a pastor, but part of going to the Marine Corps was like, I don't want to do that. And then
Sure.
I ended up back there. But I think it was used in my life for sure.
And what happened? What happened after that? What did you do? Or what made you decide to leave being in full time ministry and go into
Yeah.
what you eventually did, which is veteran services?
Yeah. So, part of my transition out of the Marine Corps was the disaster that was my first year out of the Marine Corps. I went to work at the church, and um, I mean, it's a common story, right? I lost who I was. I didn't. I looked at everyone else in my life and said things like, "You have no idea what real life is like. You don't know what it's like to be me or where I've come from." I was, literally leading Marines in combat in Iraq, and then came home to work with volunteer teams and all this stuff. I had very little tolerance for the other staff members, and I was getting in fights with these guys. Like it was ridiculous, right? In retrospect, it seems so serious at the time. It was ridiculous, and I caused a lot of problems. And part of my people confronted me that cared about me and helped me work through that. Almost lost my marriage. I mean, it was a terrible time, and I had the right people step into my life. And part of me moving forward was taking responsibility for my actions, understanding, you know, these people they don't get it because they shouldn't get it, right? And I can't expect them to get it. And so I need to be responsible for how I'm behaving. And I started to move forward. Part of that for me though was walking away from the Marine Corps, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I was proud of it. I was thankful for the opportunity to do what I had done, but I didn't stay connected to anyone. And I didn't stay connected to anyone for 10 years. So fully immersed in the world of church and ministry and all the things that went along with that. 10 years after we came back from Iraq, I had a guy reach out to me on Facebook. One of my former Marines who found me on Facebook reached out, sent a message, and said, "Hey, I met this guy." This guy, Chad Robichaux, he's starting this thing called the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and he's trying to get Marines, or it was Marines, but veterans to come to this place he has up in Colorado, and he wants to do a week-long program, but he's having a hard time getting anyone to attend. So he said if I could get some of our old Marines to come and be a part of that, he put on a program for us. Jeremy Mahon is a professional fighter as well, so that's how I knew Chad, was through the MMA world. And yeah, I mean, that was the first time since I left the Marine Corps I had any communication with any of the guys that I served with. And I said, yeah, I'll go and do that. And I did. And so much happened there. I was with about 10 guys from my old platoon and started to hear stories of veteran suicide, not just veteran suicide, suicides of Marines that had been in my platoon. When I went to Iraq, we were task organized in a weird way. It was an unusual time. So I, as a first lieutenant, had 84 Marines in my platoon. I had, 3 staff NCOs. I had 11 sergeants. So I was bigger than many of the companies in my platoon, in our battalion, as the anti-armor platoon. And so I had a lot of Marines, and I started to hear all of these stories about broken homes and suicides and combat deaths, stuff that I really should have known over the 10 years, but had walked away from and shut out of my life. And was confronted with that reality that a lot of us, I think, are confronted with at some point, that we still have a responsibility to each other. That when you put the uniform in the closet for the last time, that's not the end of your service. you still are responsible to take care of those, in my case, Marines that you said you take care of. One of the Marines that was there, one of the former Marines that was there at that retreat, had been in my platoon. When he came to my platoon, he was coming out of the School of Infantry, so he was, probably just 18. And we went to Iraq, came home. When I got out, 7 months later, my battalion rotated back to Iraq and was in the first Battle of Fallujah. And he talked about, so this is 10 years later, right? He talked about how he said, "Hey, sir, I've hated you for a long time. I've hated you for a long time because you said you'd always take care of us, you'd always be there for us, and then I found myself in Fallujah and you weren't there." And we worked through that, and it ended up being a great conversation. We have a good relationship, but I had never considered that continuing responsibility I had until then. Got to know Chad that week, and he was getting Mighty Oak started. He said, "Hey, man, you have this like teaching and curriculum development background, which I had at that time, and I don't. But I'm super charismatic. I can get people here, and we can work together. And will you help me build this thing?" And so that's when I started working with Chad. It was kind of a volunteer thing for a few years. We were hoping to do 3 or 4 programs a year, and then ended up doing, you know, 12, 15 a year. Now we're doing almost 40 a year. And so it got to the point where I couldn't continue to do my other job and do that, and left the ministry and went into that full time. So
Yeah, that's an interesting story.
kind of the high notes. Yeah. Kind of the flyover.
I think a lot of us like have experienced that to some degree. As a matter of fact, that's why Drinking Bros got created by Jared Taylor back in the day in the first place. We all were having a really hard time staying connected with each other, and all of a sudden there's this thing, social media, right? So he created a private Facebook group before this was ever a show or any of this network
It's
existed.
crazy. Yeah.
Before Black Rifle Coffee existed, it was a private Facebook group for military people to come, and the original headline that we had said, "Never drink alone." That was the thing. And you don't have to drink. We don't care about that shit, right? You shouldn't be sitting around alone. And I think if you were a leader in the military, like whether you were a leader or not in the military, you go back to your community and you're going to be a leader because you can do shit that other people can't. And the most important thing you can do is survive and make good decisions in chaotic situations, right? That's something that you can't teach. You just have to experience it. But if you were actually a leader in the military, there's a phrase you use, continuing responsibility, and I think that's a big deal. It's like you are their surrogate father, right? And they're going to go back. They're going to grow up. They're going to go on to become fathers as well, both literally and figuratively in the community. But you never stop being their surrogate father to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And it was never explained to me that way, to be honest. I had some pretty good first sergeants that stayed in touch with me, and a couple of commanders as well that stayed in touch with me over the years because they knew, right? And I just kind of learned from them. But this is another thing that I think needs to be addressed from the basic training level, right? So we get some level of training in basic, and then you go to SOI or A school, depending on which branch you're in, and then you go to your unit and you learn a whole bunch of different SOPs and TTPs. At no point does anybody sit you down and tell you how to become a man. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just kind of expected of you. And what you see is child behavior. It's frat behavior.
Yeah, that's right.
Dudes just act like idiots and get fucking drunk all the time and do dumb shit. And that hurts like you mentioned the DUIs and NJPs, it hurts our readiness. Look, there's a certain amount of wildness that we should expect from dudes that we're asking to kid up and go to war. Fair enough, right? But you have to insulate them so they can make good decisions. Like, you can do dumb shit and make good decisions while you're doing it. I've made a career out of doing that, as a matter of fact. But at no point was that explained to me. At no point was, here's how you manage your physical and mental health as you're going through all this stuff, right? And maybe it's just that we didn't know at the time or whatever, because we had gone some amount of time without a serious war. I mean, the Gulf War was not particularly serious. There's what was it, 82 days or something like that. It was over in less than
I mean, they call it the 100-hour war, right? Because it really was so short.
But the entire thing was like 82 days or something, and then it went into Desert Shield. Maybe we just didn't have that institutional experience And I'm kind of glad we do now. I think now it's really important that organizations like Mighty Oaks and others, Independence Fund, a bunch of others exist, so
Yeah.
we can put all this shit down on paper for the next time that we have to do this. So we can, instead of dealing with the fallout of war, we have a prophylaxis now. We can tell dudes literally how to stay mentally healthy, how to get your hormone levels checked, how to make sure that you're doing whatever it is that you need to do to decompress, whether it's prayer or meditation or breathing exercises or vacation or whatever it is. It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
We are lucky to have that information now. But information is just a book on a shelf unless somebody's out there talking about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting. I have had this conversation many times with folks about the good things that have come out of 20 years of war, right? And I think a lot of good things have come out of it. You mentioned many of these things, but even research into traumatic brain injury and things like that. These are good things that have come out of 20 years of deployments and even injury, how to treat certain, even mental health conditions and those things. But having organizations come along, having people come along who are committed to continuing to serve by continuing to reach back and helping those that they were once serving with. And man, I hope you're right. I hope it is something that we can take into the future. We have a pretty short memory, unfortunately, with the way the military has changed and a lot of the cultural shifts that are happening even there. We'll see. But what we do have now is a template that we can fall back to. And I'll tell you, one of my big concerns right now with the military in that regard is that leadership that understands what we're talking about is leaving and being replaced by folks who have no concept of what we're discussing. And so we'll see. But then we need to be committed to, as older veterans, right? Now, it's funny. Someone referred to me that way the other day. Like, you're one of the older veterans now, which is crazy.
Yeah,
but,
I know, right?
but we need to be committed then as the older veterans to continue writing about these things and podcasting about these things and talking about these things and finding young men and women who are serving and helping them instead of looking at them the way we were looked at by a lot of, Vietnam and Korean War era veterans with disdain. We really need to continue to do our part to help that generation coming up behind us, whether they want it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's we've done some good stuff and some not good stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
The interesting, I guess the dumbest thing we've done or the most ignorant or naive thing we've done is assume that somebody else is going to take care of it for us. But that's a reflection of greater society anyways. I mean, the premise of this show is citizen. You can, bitch and moan about your rights and wait around for somebody else to secure them for you, and you'll be a subject under their rule, or you can secure them yourself by performing the responsibilities required of you, and that's what makes you a citizen. Now, we know that. Intrinsically, we know that as human beings, there is a direct connection between effort and outcome. There's no question about that. But for some reason, we fall into these traps where we think, oh, somebody else has that, right? Somebody else has got that. And it's not, one of my old leaders told me one time, it's not what you expect that happens, it's what you inspect that happens.
That's right.
That is something that stuck with me all these years. And we just saw it, unfortunately, almost cost the president his life. Over the weekend this week. We're filming this a couple weeks ahead of time. This will go out in a couple weeks, but somebody not just doing the basics, right? Like this stuff that you think isn't important can literally cost somebody their life in extreme situations.
Yeah.
And that's why the attention to detail matters. It matters there, and it matters certainly when you're in the military, it matters, but it matters in your everyday life as well. That thing you don't think that matters, and maybe it doesn't to you, but it might matter to somebody else that's in your charge, right? Like you just have to be aware of this stuff.
And this is like fundamental leadership, right? Which I did not really understand until, many years out of the Marine Corps. But fundamental leadership is realizing that leadership, being a leader, it's not about you at all. It's not just like, hey, leaders eat last and all that stuff. No, it's like fundamentally your job as a leader is to use your gifts, your talents, your resources, your time, whatever you have, for the benefit of the people in your sphere of influence, so the people that you can lead. And it took me a long time. And I think that was kind of like the revelation that I had when I, spent time with those guys, right? I was like, oh, I thought that I had done that. And I now continue to have a responsibility to pour my life into them and to try to help them move forward. Um, but when we talk about citizenship, when we talk about these big issues, when we look at what happened this weekend and we complain about our country, the question is, what are you doing about it? Right? Like, how are you using the resources, the opportunities, the voice, the platform, the relationships that you have to change the direction that our country is moving, or to change the direction that your family is moving, or whatever it is you have the opportunity to influence? Leadership fundamentally is saying, I have stuff and it's not for me. I don't have these things for me. I have these things so that I can be a benefit to those
Mm.
around me. And for me, when that switch kind of flipped, it changed how I look at my wife and my kids and my community and even the work that I do. It's a blessing to have resources that I can use for the benefit of other people. And again, that perspective changes everything.
Yeah, it really does. And I was so you've got Mighty Oaks, but you also have um, the podcast, and you write a blog as well.
Yeah.
Some of the one of the more recent entries, not more recent, but from around this time last year, was talking about developing a growth mindset. And I
Yeah.
think this is something, another thing that should be taught in a prophylactic way to people that are going to go into extreme situations. I think it's part of growing up and becoming an adult,
Yeah.
particularly a
Yeah.
man in general. But
Yeah.
it is essentially it's one of the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is to insulate yourself from catastrophizing things, right? So there's growth mindset and there's scarcity mindset. Scarcity mindset
Yeah.
means
Yeah.
that resources are limited, and I have to stay in a constant state of stress to secure those resources at all time. And to be honest, we're not cavemen. Life is not like that anymore.
Right.
Like, I know a lot
Right.
of
Right.
people are struggling financially because the economy sucks right now, and some of that is cyclical. Some of it is because our government is fucked up. But you can't think that way, right? Like, it is poison, and it leads to catastrophizing, which is basically, it's the undoing of the hope mechanism. That's the thing that keeps you going forward, right? Like, if you think about this shows up in pretty much every philosophy or religious text that's ever been written, but yin and yang, or whatever you want to call it, good and
Yeah.
evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is hope and fear. Let's reduce it to that, right? So people like us, and I think this touches our community in a way that it doesn't touch most communities, but people like us aren't necessarily afraid of dying. So the existential threats like that it doesn't even occur. It doesn't occur
Yeah.
to me. I think when it does occur to most people, like, if you think about dying and it makes you anxious or afraid, it's probably because you don't want to leave your wife and children behind without somebody to take care of them. And that's the thing, right? So we don't care about dying. We care about letting down our men. We care about letting down our family. So what do you do with that? You put it behind you, right? And you let it chase you. But
Yeah.
there's also got to be the hope in the foreground. Like, there's got to be the growth mindset. You know what? I'm going to get a little bit better today, or things are going to be okay. I just got to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Reassociate your brain to understand the intrinsic connection between effort and outcome. Right. This is America. This is what the American dream is. The harder I work, the
Yeah.
better I'll do.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yep.
that's the yin and yang of life to me. It's like
Yeah.
I'm chasing hope, and I'm running from failure, not for myself, because it's not about me, but I'm running from failing my team, my community, my family, etc.
Yeah. So I have a podcast called the March or Die podcast. And, for me, these are like the two alternatives, right? You can march, which is just you put one foot in front of the other, keep moving forward. We could talk about the growth mindset and how that's what pulls you forward. It's hope that really motivates you in a way where you can look at the world around you and understand what I'm seeing right now, feeling right now, experiencing right now. This is not all there is. There's something bigger out there, and that calls me forward, right? So that's marching. But then there's death, and when I talk about death in that context, I'm trying to be careful to explain that death is rarely the physical kind. For some people, it is, but most of the time, death is representative of an emotional and a relational and a spiritual death. It's people who are breathing, maybe they're going to work, they're doing the things they're supposed to do, but there is no forward movement. On the inside, they know they're dead. They're not growing, they're not developing, nothing's changing. There have been obstacles or trials or traumas, something that has popped up in their life. And instead of growing through that, instead of taking the next step, instead of doing the next thing, instead of hanging on to hope that there is something bigger out there, they've concluded and made the decision to just stay where they are. And that type of death, man, I think it infects many, many people around us. And it's so easy to look like you're living, look like you're doing what you're supposed to do, but without any purpose, direction, or as you mentioned, hope. And that's where we see immaturity, childish behavior. Men who have learned how to do hard things in the military spend the remainder of their lives playing video games and drinking themselves stupid and doing dumb stuff, right? There's no growth. What they've decided to do is stay where they are and die. And calling people out of that is so important.
Mm.
We have to be able to look back like we would as, small unit leaders, look back over our shoulder and say, hey man, follow me. I'm not telling you to go over there. What I'm asking you to do is follow me and we'll go over there together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, it can be difficult to find the right prescription for that in civilian life because it's obvious in the military. I'm this
Yeah,
rank,
yeah, yeah.
I'm this rank
Yeah.
and you're this rank. I'm in this billet, you're in this billet, and we have this mission from a higher command. So it's very obvious how to handle that situation. Not so obvious, I guess, in the civilian world, although maybe it is, right? Because what do you do when you have I guess a granular philosophy on something is that you expand it to its greatest common factor. What are the or underlying principles that we're talking about here? It is teamwork and readiness and mindset
Yeah.
and stuff like this. That's the challenge, right? The challenge is for us to commit the time and effort and thinking power and maybe even be vulnerable a little bit with ourselves and our situation to figure out exactly how it is to map that information onto the country. And I'll tell you this, it is, I don't know if most people know this or not, but the suicide rates for the military are 3 times higher in the 20 years after a war than they are during the war.
Yeah.
That's been the case in World War One, World War Two, so long as we've been tracking World War One, Two,
Yeah.
Vietnam, and we don't know about the GWAT yet because it lasted so long, but we'll see, right? It shows how imperative it is to take those lessons learned and learn new ones that map on to the civilian life afterwards, because
Yeah.
we're there's 2 things happening here. One, we're losing people that we shouldn't lose, but not more importantly, but perhaps more importantly, we're losing resources that can actually make the country better and stronger, right?
Yep.
Like the men that came back from World War II, as damaged as they may have been, they turned this country into a global superpower. Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't the industry that did it. It was the grit and determination that turned into economic abundance and purchasing power. That's what turned America into the dominant culture on earth. And we need that. We need it desperately, especially right now. Right. We can't afford to lose another generation of warfighter post-war that should be out there mentoring and guiding and leading other people.
Yeah. You're 100% right. And I think it's the difference between, again, in the leadership world, it's the difference between doing leadership and being a leader. And this is where I fell on my face after the Marine Corps. I felt very capable as a Marine infantry officer, a unit leader. I had been taught the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures. I had gone to the school and I learned how to do leadership in that environment. And I felt very comfortable with that. There's a clear hierarchy there. Again, as you mentioned, everyone knows where they fall, right? And the mission is clear. And even when it's not clear, the people who are making those decisions and carrying that forward, that makes sense to us. But that's doing leadership. And I think a lot of people in the military who are coming out of the military think that doing leadership makes them a leader, which is why they're so confused when they leave the military. They get rid of the uniform and the rank, and they can't hold down a job. They can't function in their home. Society is so overwhelming. Culture is so overwhelming to them. because they knew how to do that leadership thing over there, but they didn't truly get the essence of leadership. And that's where we're going to have to transition out of the military, understanding I am a leader. And what that means is I use whatever I have available to me to benefit those in my world, benefit those in my life. Maybe that's in my job, right? Maybe I don't have the positional leadership role in this company, but when I'm serving others and trying to make other people better and trying to make other people successful, that positional leadership will come. But that's just doing leadership. Being a leader is I'm going to help my kids grow and become what they're supposed to be. I'm going to help my spouse, do whatever it is they're equipped and called to do. I'm going to invest in this culture and in this society that I'm a part of with whatever tools and resources and opportunities and giftings that I have. That is being a leader as opposed to doing leadership. And if we can get military people and veterans who've come out of the military to get it, right? Like, hey, you were good over there because you understood it, but be a leader. Keep pouring into the people around you. They don't have to wear a uniform or have the rank or understand, military culture. You have a responsibility to use what you have for the benefit of other people. I struggled with leadership when I left the Marine Corps, and I think that was the reason I struggled with it so much, because I couldn't get it. Like, I didn't understand. I went from this like super aggressive environment into a church culture where I still thought that yelling at your coworkers and knocking stuff over was the way to get things done. And it wasn't the way to get things done, in case anyone is wondering. But then I finally understood, like, no, like the tactics, the techniques, the procedures, the specific way of doing leadership, that changes from one environment to another. But fundamentally, to be a leader means that I'm making the people around me better. And man, that's going to get me off the couch. It's going to have me put down the remote control or the video game controller or walk away from the bottle or whatever, right? Because I'm still called to that. And I think that's what we're missing for so many folks who have served and served well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think at our core, even the wildest of us, particularly people that are gunfighters, kind of understand that it's like nothing we're doing is about us, right? Everything. This is one of the things that I say a lot is that every meaningful thing you do in your life will be in the service of other people. It'll be in the service of your family or your country or something like that, right? And you folded the idea of purpose into it, and that is the purpose of life. Like whatever anybody says about what life is all about, maybe you have a religious bend to it or whatever. The purpose of life is to serve other people, right? Whether you're, regardless of what religion you're in, everybody's got alms. Everybody's got, Jesus washing people's feet. Like the top guy, think of, Augustus Caesar maybe washing somebody's feet. That would be a similar thing. It's like we're on this earth to serve other people. And if that is true, then we're going to be happiest isn't the right word, most fulfilled certainly, but when we're doing things in the service of other people. As a matter of fact, Gandhi said, if you want to truly find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. And you bring this up quite a bit in the March or Die stuff. As a matter of fact, one of the questions you posit, even in the title, is how do I move forward when my world is falling apart? I would say when your world's falling apart, and I tell people this a lot, like if you're going through something, if you're having a really hard time, if there's a problem that you're dealing with, go find somebody that maybe has a similar problem and try to help them. And in doing so, you will solve your own problem. If you can turn your pain and suffering into empathy for other people, you can save your life and their life. And that is how that is the I guess best kept secret about life.
Man, you're exactly right. So I've been talking a lot recently about this issue of veteran suicide, and we wrote a little book on veteran suicide and dealing with that. And there are a lot of ways to look at that. But one of the things I say, or one of the points I try to make in that booklet, is we're attacking the wrong enemy when we talk about this issue of veteran suicide. So much of what we discuss is about intervention. It literally is, how can I keep someone who wants to hurt themselves from hurting themselves, right? And so when we talk about suicide prevention and all these programs and all these ideas, it really boils down to that. I want to keep someone who wants to kill themselves, to take their life. I want to prevent them from doing that. That's suicide prevention. And to me, that's attacking the wrong enemy. What we need to go after is kind of this dual enemy of purpose and identity. And you just did such a great job of breaking down that purpose piece. But when someone gets a hold of who they are, not the service member, but fundamentally who they are, this is what I'm about, this is who I am, and then engage with the purpose, right? And the large purpose is serving others. When they get a hold of purpose and identity, then we don't have to deal with that. How do I intervene to prevent them from hurting themselves? We are attacking the right enemy, and the enemy is purposelessness, a loss of identity. And when we can infuse that, man, there's also hope comes with that, and direction comes with that, and strength comes with that, and clarity of mind comes with that. But we're going after the wrong thing. We're constantly trying to like put people in a box when what we need to do is get down to who they are and help them understand. And this is maybe unique to our community, but help them understand, look, your service to the country, your service to your community, your service to your brothers and sisters in arms, that didn't end, man. Like you still have the opportunity to do this. And I think a lot of veterans kind of look at the world and go, well, I did that, right? I've done that. I've done my time. I've done my service. Well, if it's over, then your life effectively is over too.
Sure, yeah.
You need to re-engage with that purpose and identity, understanding who you are and how you fulfill that purpose. And yeah, you will be most fulfilled when you're engaging with that.
Yeah, so not everybody, and it can be challenging, right? Not everybody is going to go start Mighty Oaks Foundation, right?
For sure,
like
for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Your 9 to 5 for most of you isn't going to be about serving veterans,
Yeah.
but your
Yeah.
your 24-hour day can be about serving your community, right?
Yeah.
To include your
Right.
family.
Right.
My friend Chad Wright likes to say that the smallest form of government is the family, the nuclear family.
Yeah.
And I always
Yeah.
like that phrase. Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I think of it is this: commander's intent in the military, or we would say a foundational statement. You know what I mean? In the business world.
Yeah.
Like so at Black Rifle Coffee, our mission statement was, we serve coffee to people who love America. Coffee and culture to people
Yeah.
who love America. That was it, right?
Yeah.
So at any
Yeah.
time during the day, anybody that works for the company, no matter what department they're in the absence of centralized leadership or advice, can ask themselves, is what I'm doing supporting that mission, right?
Yep. Yep.
And you're in the military, it's easy. Commander's intent is, hey, we're going to go to these grid squares, and our intent is to root out somebody or to cordon it off or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I know that every action I take needs to be in support of that. And what it does is it diffuses centralized authority into the hands of the people that are actually making decisions on the ground, right? Now you got to do that in your own life as well, right? Yeah, like that is what leadership is. It's bringing people up to the level where you can disseminate that kind of information and the intent gets done, right? But the only way that it happens is if they see you doing it yourself, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
So I would ask people, what's your mission statement in life? And if you can't answer that question, I feel like you need to. I feel like you need to spend some
Yeah.
time with yourself. Think about the stuff that matters to your family, your community, your country, your religion, or whatever it is. The stuff that matters to you, and then fold in your goals and what you want to accomplish, and figure out what your mission statement is. Because if you don't have one, if you're going nowhere, that's exactly where the fuck you're going to end up.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I wrestled through that several years ago and settled for a personal mission statement. And I different areas of my life, I have different things that I want to accomplish, but broadly, a personal mission statement. I want people and organizations to be better for me having been there. And that doesn't mean anything to everyone, but to me, I want people and organizations to be better for me having been there. That means when I show up in a relationship, or I show up as part of an organization or whatever, wherever I end up in my life, I want those people and that place to be better because I was there. And that then carries with it, you have to serve and you have to give and all the stuff that goes along with that. But for me, that just kind of encapsulates that purpose and hope and direction.
Yeah, and it's not going to be the same for everybody. I mean, we might all
No,
have
it is not.
like
It is not.
there might be the same wording, the same words rather that show up like service, community, whatever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
But it's going to be bespoke. It's going to be very specific to you, and it should be.
yeah, yeah,
You don't want to just copy somebody else. And look, it's again, they're going to be similar because we're all just meat sacks walking around on a spinning rock, right? I mean, it's
right,
life is
right.
really not that complicated, but you know, I if I believe in balance. I think that nature usually finds some kind of balance and symbiosis where there's enough people that want to do certain things and the gaps get filled. That's usually how it works in nature, right? Even sociologically, that's usually how it
Yeah,
works.
yeah,
Like, for example, one example of this is if you look in Northern Europe, where they don't have crazy like affirmative action laws and stuff, like Scandinavia especially, they don't have crazy affirmative action laws. All the jobs get done, and people kind of gravitate towards their own likes and dislikes
yeah,
and do
yeah,
those jobs, right? I mean, it just
yeah,
happens. I really do feel like that. So it's going to be different from person to person. Um, and the good, like you get propagandized a lot, but the good news is people are starting to wake up with the whole college thing. For example, they're finding out,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
I can
yeah,
go to trade school for 18 to 24 months, have no debt, and get a job that pays 70 to 80K a year right now,
right,
which is
right.
$30,000 over the average income in America right now with no debt,
Yeah,
right? So maybe you're a person that goes to school, maybe you're a person that doesn't, but all this stuff
right.
out there exists, and it's going to depend on you. The reason I say that is don't just copy and paste from somebody else's life.
Yeah,
Really
yeah,
dig deep and find out, because I think it's important for society that you look into exactly what it is you're into and do that thing, because
yeah,
maybe most other people don't want to do that, and if you don't do it because you think something else is better or whatever, then it doesn't get done, and it's a net negative
yeah.
for society if that happens.
Yeah, and when I talk about using your gifts, talents, resources, whatever, that's exactly it. It's, man, don't be someone else. Don't try to be someone else, but you need to figure out who you are and go do that. And it's amazing how fulfilled we can become when we're really doing what we were gifted to do, what we were wired to do, right? And yeah, there's so much power in that. And you're right. Society would be so much better if we would let people do what they're gifted in and what they're capable of doing. But for those who are struggling, find that thing, whatever that thing is, and go do that and do it well and serve other people. And the world will be a better place because of it.
Yeah. Now I want to get into Mighty Oaks specifically. So you met up with Chad Robichaux somewhere
Yep.
through a UFC fighter, you said, or a fighter.
An MMA fighter,
Okay.
yeah, one of the guys who was in my platoon, yeah.
And what was the conversation like? Like what was Chad? Was Chad already working on it at the time, or did you guys get together and be like, you know what needs to happen is just tell me that story.
Yeah, so Chad and his family had, for those that are familiar with Chad's story, he did, I think, 6 or 8 deployments to Afghanistan. He was part of a Special Operations Command team, and it's kind of a very interesting, non-traditional military career. But he came home from that after deploying for a few years and dealt with severe post-traumatic stress and found help and found hope. And a lot of that came through the mentorship of a guy at his wife's church. So he would tell the story, right? And he would explain it this way, and he has and does. When I found that, I felt like I had found the cure to cancer, and I needed to share that with other people.
Mm.
And so the result of that was starting the Mighty Oaks Foundation. He and his family were living in Houston at the time. They moved to Westcliff, Colorado, and the idea was to bring veterans to the beautiful mountains of Westcliff, Colorado, and spend time really communicating to them, these veterans, what Chad had found in his own life. And they did that. They were doing that for about a year. The challenge, and it's a challenge. I mean, we all understand this in the veteran community. Veterans are super cynical, right?
Hmm.
And so you could ask them to do anything, and they're probably not going to do it. And this was back in 2011, so there weren't a lot of even veterans programs at the time. And so that's when we connected. They were trying to get this thing moving, and that's when we connected. And the conversation was, Chad saying, "I've got this thing that I want to do. This is what I want it to look like." And for anyone that knows Chad, he's super charismatic.
Hmm.
he's really good at getting people on board and getting people to come along, but did not have a background in developing curriculum and developing programs and teaching and those kind of things, which I did. And so um, he said, "Hey, I'm trying to get this thing moving. Would you come along and help me build it out?" And they've been doing that for about a year. That's when I came along, and then we went to work. And it's crazy. This year we'll have almost 1,000 students come through one of our week-long programs. We have 39 weeks of programs at 5 locations across the country. And so we went from, like, we're asking our friends, the people that we serve with, to come and try this thing out, like, trust us, to a huge waiting list and a lot of folks that we're able to serve.
Um, if you had to reduce the mission of Mighty Oaks down to a paragraph, what would it be? Like, specifically?
If I had to reduce it down to a paragraph, what we do fundamentally is help people who are broken because of their service in the military, their service as first responders, to find hope and direction, and then restore their legacies. We call this our legacy program. We talk about trauma. We talk about these issues that all of us endure, whether because of life or our service. But understanding, and this is what we've been talking about, for the last hour, that there is hope when we engage with our purpose, and that the traumas of your past no longer have to bind you if you're moving forward. So it's hard to put that, I guess, down in a paragraph, but fundamentally that's what we do, and we're entirely staffed by people who have come through our program. So that's veterans, service members, first responders. Everyone who is there as a student also falls into that community. And so it's very much a peer-to-peer. I'm not telling you what to do because I've read a book. I'm telling you how you can move forward because I've done this and it's worked for me.
And what's the like, when you send somebody back out into the community, what's your goal? What's your hope for them? You know what I mean? Like, what is it? What does success look like for that person moving forward?
Yeah, so we have our program is 5 days long, and that's a starting point. It's not, the goal is not to get through that 5 days. The goal is that during that 5 days, they'll make a decision to get up and move forward. That's the goal. Get up and move forward. And then whatever that means specific to that person. Some people are dealing with substance abuse or some kind of other addiction that they have allowed into their lives or brought into their lives to deal with the traumas that they've been dealing with. Some are dealing with broken relationships. Some are dealing just with hopelessness and purposelessness. Many of the folks who show up at our program will say on Monday, when the thing starts, if this doesn't work, I'm going to take my life when I get home. So the goal would be different for every person, but singularly, the goal of that week is to get each person, wherever they are, to make a decision to move forward. And then we have a very robust, what we call aftercare program. We have mentors and counselors and a lot of other people who can walk out the specifics of that with the graduates. So someone makes the decision this week, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to need a lot of help. I've got a mess. But I'm going to move forward. Once they've made that decision, we can then begin to resource them with, again, counselor support, help, whatever they need to, I was going to say, get to that next level. That's not entirely it, but to deal with whatever brokenness is in their life, to help them engage with that purpose and move forward. At the end of the day, for me, a big win is someone who comes to our program that we've been able to help post-program. They get a job, they have a great family, and they engage with their culture and community in a positive, meaningful way, that they stand up and lead again. These are leaders. These are people who learned how to lead in combat, learned how to lead in their communities as law enforcement or the fire service, and they stopped for one reason or another. And if we're able to help them get back on their feet, make a decision to move forward, equip them, give them the tools they need, and then see them do that, man, that's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to create force multipliers again. What it does is,
Yep.
It creates herd immunity against bad psychology. That's what really happens, right? Because psychology is infectious. It is contagious, and the more leaders that are out there, obviously, the better off that we're going to be.
Yeah.
And it's like if you're wondering what that looks like in a practical sense and you can't imagine it in your own life, I'll tell you, think of retirement ceremonies for Hall of Fame athletes and what it looks like. You see these tough guys that are, at the peak of their game, blubbering, like crying and blubbering because they know that the thing that has defined them as a human being is going away now to some degree, right?
Right.
For us, it just happens not abruptly, but over a longer period of time. So we don't feel the full weight of it until oftentimes it's too late, right? And
Yeah.
so if you're out there and you feel depressed, well, the first thing you should do is get your hormone levels checked, because almost everybody that's in our situation is fucked. Like there's something
Sure.
wrong just because of the toxic exposure and the head injuries and stuff. But another thing you should do is imagine yourself the last time you felt fulfilled. Like, oh shit, I guarantee you're going to find a place in your life where not where you didn't have responsibility, not where everything was okay, but where you were actually challenged by
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
to some degree, and that you were rising to that challenge, because that's what
Yeah,
men,
that's good.
that's what men do, right? So I think it's a good mental exercise to do that. And then
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got to find a way to put yourself back in that position again. Take on, like, don't, when you feel bad, don't shirk responsibility. Take on more. You know what I
That's
mean?
good.
That's
Yeah.
how I've always felt.
No, that's good. Yeah, we medicate all that stuff away instead of re-engaging with that place, that time, those events that created purpose in our lives. And yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and then luckily there are programs like yours out there that are helping with this. Not a lot of them. Well, there's different organizations depending on what your specific need is.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
tell people. Tell me the kind of person that Mighty Oaks deals with, and then tell people that are listening how they can get involved.
Yeah. Yeah. So we say we help veterans, active duty service members, first responders, and spouses. We have men's programs and women's programs. And the type of person really, it spans the spectrum. It is those who have served in the military for a long time. They're dealing with combat trauma and they're trying to reorder their lives. Maybe they're transitioning and trying to figure out how to get a hold of purpose and direction and those kind of things. And we can help with that, right? There are also those who also served in the military but endured some kind of trauma as a child, and they've never gotten over that, and they've never really fully engaged with identity or purpose, and have engaged in bad behaviors, again, medicating away how they feel, and have made a mess of their lives. And they're at that place where I don't know what else to do. There are those who have tried every clinical program that they could try, and there are some good ones, but they've tried clinical programs, just never gotten it back. People who are in relationships with people that love them, but can't tolerate them anymore. Wives or husbands that say you've got to do something, and then people who are just, man, I'm a little confused, right? I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not broken, I'm not at a place where I'm going to take my life, but I need some help figuring out what this next phase or stage of my life looks like. If you served in the military, you're serving in the military, you're a first responder, you're married to someone who is, regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, we would invite you to attend our program. It's a week long, again, one of 5 locations across the country. We cover the cost of the program and we cover the cost of travel. So there's no output for you other than those 5 days, and we'll do everything we can to support you even beyond that. Best way to find out about us is our website, mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org. And there you can apply, or you can, find out about us. A lot of information there as well. So
Sweet.
yeah, I'd love for you to check it out.
Yeah, and then you guys have a podcast as well. Yeah, you have a couple. You have March or Die, and then you have Situation Report with Chad. How often does that go out?
Yeah, so Situation Report, Chad has another podcast called Resilient. So we both had our own podcast, then we were doing Situation Report together, and now we're kind of back to doing our own. So Resilient is his podcast. You can find that, follow his social media, and you can find that. And then my primary focus is the podcast called March or Die. And that is my title of my book and a bunch of things I've written on, but also the title of the podcast. The March or Die podcast. I have a website, marchordie.com, that you can find that podcast and all the information about it.
Sweet. Yeah. And you also have a website, Stalnecker.com, that has
Lots of websites. I just want people to find me.
Yeah.
I don't want to be hard to find me, right?
Yeah, and if you're trying to
go looking, you'll find it.
If you're trying to find Chad, good luck spelling his name. Just put Chad Robo in Google and it'll find
Yeah, it'll come up.
You're not going to be
he's
able to spell
everywhere.
his name, I promise you that.
There's an X and some other letters.
Yeah, there's
in
like
there,
5 consonants in a row or some
Right,
bullshit.
right.
Well, look, thanks for coming today, man. I appreciate the conversation. Also appreciate what you guys do out there. It's a very necessary thing.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. And this is how we help others is by communicating these things. So thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.